I need to preface this by saying that I didn't watch Wrath of Khan because I had any interest in Star Trek. That's not to say I didn't enjoy the film. I did. I will, of course, discuss that in more detail in a moment. But I think it's important to say where my review is coming from. I say review. I don't feel like I can properly review this with no knowledge of any other Star Treks. Or at least I can't do an in-depth analysis of the characters and their behaviours and things with reference to other Star Trek films or series. And the reason I watch this, quite simply, is because I love Kirstie Alley. And this is very much one of her breakout roles, and she's the only reason I watched it. But I have to say, there were other things about it that I did enjoy. So to answer the first question that I had when I started watching this, can you watch this and follow this with no other real Star Trek knowledge? The answer is yes, quite simply. I imagine, I'm pretty certain I'd get a lot more out of it if I had seen other Star Trek films and had other things to draw upon, but just watching it on its own, I found it easy enough to follow. There were some things that went over my head, I think. But generally speaking, if there's a reason why you want to watch this, such as a love of Kirstie Alley, I think you'll probably be able to watch it without getting too confused. It is technically called Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. But for me, that didn't make any difference. This was released originally in 1982, directed by Nicholas Meyer, written by Jack B. Swords, and we have a cast that I was very aware of, so even if I had no kind of prior Star Trek knowledge, I'm at least aware of the weight that names like William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy carry. For me, of course, Kirstie Alley was the pull factor. She plays a character called Saavik, and I did wonder about trying to summarise the narrative for this, but it's very complicated, and I think it's worth just watching it, but I'll read the description from IMDb to kind of give a general insight into what it's about. And the description from IMDb is as follows. With the assistance of the Enterprise crew, Admiral Kirk must stop an old nemesis, Khan, from using the life-generating Genesis device as the ultimate weapon. And I was really interested in this concept of the Genesis device because it creates life out of dead matter. And that's obviously a really fascinating concept, and I think they utilised that quite well, and particularly Khan's desperation to get hold of this device. And I think the narrative developed quite well. It introduced characters at a really good rate. As I said, I generally had a reasonable idea of what was going on. Sometimes I feel like sci-fi films, speaking as somebody who's not a big sci-fi fan, I feel like they can really overcomplicate things. But that didn't seem to be the case here. Not too much, and that's something that I really definitely appreciated. The music was amazing. The music stood out to me as being particularly incredible, including the use of Amazing Grace. I won't say anything else about that, but I thought it was a beautiful piece and definitely one of the most interesting versions of that song I've ever heard. The costumes were great, the set designs were brilliant, the special effects, the shots of the galaxy were absolutely stunning and definitely felt higher quality than the early 80s. And I really enjoyed it, and I don't really have too many other thoughts to add to that, because I feel like any thoughts I add are not that relevant to Star Trek fans. And if you're like me and you're not a Star Trek fan, but there's a specific reason why you want to see it, I don't want to go into too much more detail and spoil it. So this is less of a review and more of me just saying, hey, this film's pretty good. It's not that complicated to follow if, like me, you're not a big fan of sci-fi or indeed Star Trek. Will I watch any other Star Trek films? Not without a reason. If there is another actor in another Star Trek film, actually, there are a couple of actors in a couple of Star Trek films that I kind of want to see, so maybe I will watch another Star Trek film. If you have any recommendations, particularly for ones that are not that complicated, so I can kind of have an easier second introduction, if you like. So yes, maybe I will, but it's not like when I watched the first Star Wars film, I instantly had to watch the rest. I don't have that experience with this one, but I did quite like it. It was much easier to follow than I'd anticipated. Really well done, really interesting narrative, and I guess it's worth saying Kirstie Alley was absolutely brilliant as well. Definitely worth watching if there's anything pulling you towards it. If you're a Star Trek fan, I'd love to know kind of how you rank it with the other ones. Personally, I quite enjoyed it more than I thought I would.